Welcome to our Azure Founder Friday. You may hear some of the wind.
But I tell you what, it's nice and warm in here.
Yes.
We're in the hoop house here at the Ellie's Eden Hoop House. And this is where the Ellie's Eden plants, one of many hoop houses where they get their start.
David, how many hoop houses do we have up here right now for Ellie's Eden?
I think there's 12 now, and 2 more being built. Well, one right behind us that hopefully will be built here within the next couple weeks.
Oh, so exciting. So David's going to talk to us about our plant starts, or live plant starts that become available now. They became available mid-March, and they are available all the way through early June. And so we're going to talk about how Ellie's Eden got started. We're also going to talk about how the plants are cared for and then how they get to you. So David, I'm going to hand the floor to you on that.
All right. Well, the original of Ellie's Eden was kind of part of the farm operation initially. So my boys were farming and doing some vegetable starts or some vegetables, and they decided that they were going to go ahead and get them started ahead of time. But we didn't have any greenhouse, so we got really ingenuitive, and we took PVC pipe around like so, draped plastic over the PVC pipe, and started all these plants just right on the floor in there, and it worked pretty good until one day we got a bunch of snow. And the PVC pipe went whoop,
oh no,
and drooped in on the plants. We got it back up, and most of them survived. It wasn't the end of the world. That was kind of fun, but we didn't have any fan or anything. And then later in the season, they had most of it out, but later in the season, then that same hoop house, because in order to cool it, we just had to open the plastic on the ends. And the boys got busy, and they were still pretty young. They were like 12 and 13 or something like that at the time, and so they forgot to open the end one sunny day, and all of it was just absolutely cooked.
Oh no!
So the last of it was cooked. A few of them came back, but most of So the next year they decided, hey, we want to get a real greenhouse, something that's not just a piece of plastic. So we went and found somebody had one for sale. It was just a small one. I think it was maybe 8 feet wide by maybe 20 feet long. Mm-hmm. Had 2 shelves on it. It was nice. We still have it. It's sitting out here, but we don't use it anymore. So they were going to use that for their starts, and it worked really well. And but in the meantime, my daughter, Sarah, who is just older than them, she decided that she was going to do some extra and see if she could sell them around locally, some tomatoes and stuff. So, so it seems like people really wanted the little plants. They were pretty popular. And so her grandma asked, and she lives up in the Seattle area, and she says, hey, can you send me some plants? And she was on one of the delivery routes. And so Sarah boxed them up in a box, and they got to her in perfect shape. And she's like so excited that she was able to get her plants on the truck, and it worked just fine. So we were talking, well, maybe let's try them further away, because just Seattle, that's only, a 2-day route. So we ended up putting them on. We had some friends that were on the very end of the longest route we have. And so she boxed up a big sample box of plants for them, and we want to see how they arrive there. And so they arrived in perfect shape at the very end of the longest route we had. And so that gave the idea that, hey, we could serve Azure customers with plants this way. And so the next year she planted quite a few more, and mostly it was just tomatoes to begin with, maybe a few peppers. And then, then we put up, that was pretty successful. Everything went really well. The following year, we put up 2 greenhouses about the size of this one, in addition to her little greenhouse, and started a variety of stuff. So that was back Around, well, shoot, going on to almost 20 years ago now.
Wow.
So that we first started shipping plants. So needless to say, there's been a lot of changes, a lot of improvements, a lot of refining since then. But, it's not something foreign. I mean, we've been doing the farming for generations. We did starts for ourselves, just not vegetable starts. We've done other things until then. But we've been doing these vegetable starts for going on 20 years. We originally called it Sarah's Starts. My daughter's name is Sarah, and my oldest daughter, and she is the one who had kind of taken the lead on it to begin with. A few years back, we found out that we had a name violation, one we did not realize, that a trademark name that somebody was concerned about. So instead of fighting over it, we just rebranded Ellie's Eden instead of Sarah's Starts. So that's why we ended up changing the name. Instead of fighting somebody over a brand, we didn't figure that our customers would care that much, whether it was Sarah's Starts or Ellie's Eden. They're still the exact same starts, same methods and processes that we do.
Yeah, and it's a family legacy, right? I mean, Ellie's Eden comes from a family.
So yeah, the funny thing, Ellie is is a granddaughter. So it's kind of named from a daughter to a granddaughter of mine. So that's exciting. She and Ellie is she's still really young, but she really loves the greenhousing. She'll be out here anytime that she possibly can. And she gets her picture on the sale flyer quite a bit. I think she's on there this month.
As a matter of fact, I think she is as well. And so if you see this adorable little curly-headed blonde on the cover with the plants, that's Ellie.
So over the years, we've actually have learned quite a bit about getting higher quality starts and higher quality plants. So starting with, we use very careful to use organic medium, and we're talking about the very best organic medium. We didn't do it this year, but a couple years ago I did a side-by-side with organic medium from the hardware store kind of thing, or maybe it was Home Depot or something, and the organic medium, the mix that we use. We did a side-by-side, filled half a tray with each, and it is absolutely no comparison. The knowledge that we've had in being able to use the right medium, to use the right nutrients in these plants, it gives them an amazing start, and they will be very resilient. Hey, if they come in your order a little bit messed up, upside down, whatever, ripped, tell you what, they're still fine. They are really, really resilient. These things will take a lot of abuse. Not that they need to. Most of the deliveries go really smoothly. We mark them correctly to do however so that the boxes stay upright and all that good stuff. And 95 to 99% of the time, they arrive in perfect condition. But for some reason they don't. Obviously let us know, but they're really resilient plants. Yeah, so another thing that we try to do is we try to ship a little bit smaller plants in general. When they're overgrown, they have a really tough root ball, and they will still grow fine, but when you pull them out, you want a very standard root. You don't want a lot of very tough root ball. So if you look at that, the roots are clear to the bottom, they're well permeated, but they're not going round and round and round. That is ideal. That's where you want your ideal. It still comes out in a nice clump. It'll go in your garden nicely. And you can get, this is probably on the low side a little bit. It can be a little bit more root than this, but this is better to have a little bit less root than too much, because when you get too much, it gets what we call root bound, and they will come out. But if you do get a plant like that, rip some of the roots apart on the bottom of your pot. Just kind of rip it apart and don't just put it in that solid root ball. It will still grow. It's just what they call transplant shock will take place. It's not really shock. It's the time for the plant to readjust to the open soil. And so the more, if they're just perfect, it doesn't take anything. These won't even slow down once you put them in the soil, unless of course there's really bad weather or something. If you're putting them out, it's always a little bit of a good idea to harden them off just a little bit. Now they don't need a lot. I'm not saying set them out for 2 weeks. It's not a big deal. You can even plant them without hardening them off.
David, what do you mean by hardening them off for our customers who don't understand that term?
So hardening them off means to put them in a harsher environment. Here in the greenhouse, they're grown in a pretty ideal growing environment. The temperature stays about, it's heated at night to keep it to a certain temperature. It's cooled in the day if the sun gets too warm. It doesn't have to, adjust to the outdoors. Not much wind in here, except we do use some fans just to keep them stockier. And that's another thing about these, is you're going to get stocky plants. These are just at the grocery store kind of stuff. They'll be really what we call leggy. So they'll be really thinner, slender, and tall. You take them away from each other, sometimes they'll even just tip over on their own. Because of the way that we raise them, you're never going to get I shouldn't say never, but you're never going to get a very leggy plant. Nothing like that. They're going to be pretty uniform and pretty, and not seriously overgrown. We try to be very careful with that. When you're putting out plants, most plants, let's see if I have. Most plants like to be planted pretty much level with where they're at.
Do you want to find one?
Tomatoes are not one of those. Let's see if we go to squash here. These are young ones, but this is big enough. So this is a pumpkin here. This one's a little bit immature, but your roots are down here. So when you level them into the ground, you want it right to the crown. You plant as close to the crown as possible. Does the best. If you're going to, tomatoes are actually the one exception to that. Tomatoes like to be planted deeper. So tomato, if I were planting this one, and this is a fairly small one here, but this is good to go. I would actually snip these leaves off down here on the bottom. I just snip them off like this. And I would plant my plant into the soil at least this deep. That way, these little hairs here that are on the tomato will actually turn into roots. And that gives more depth of soil. You're able to pull more nutrients up. And tomatoes grow really fast. The lost 2 inches or whatever and if it's a longer plant, if it's a little bit bigger plant that you get, say this tall, or, taller, and you plant it 4 or 5 or 6 inches, here we usually plant the leftover plants that we don't sell anymore because they're overgrown or they're not ideal. But sometimes we've had them, get up, so tall, and we'll take and dig a little bigger hole and wrap them round and round and just let the little top stick out about this much. And they do wonderfully. They're just fine. Of course, that's breaking up the root ball. You don't leave the root ball like that on a plant that's overgrown like that. But you're not going to get any of those in your order. we won't send them like that.
Are there any other plants like tomatoes that you would plant that deep, or is tomatoes pretty much the only one?
Tomatoes, tomatillos, that family is the ones primarily that you would plant deep. Peppers can take it, but it's not really any advantage. I would plant peppers more towards the where they're at.
Okay, so they want to be more ground
level.
level.
Ground level, a little bit up. Corn, you're going to want to plant just a little deep. If you plant it too shallow, it'll tip over in the wind.
Okay.
And it doesn't hurt anything to go a little bit deep.
So I've been doing it wrong. There you go. We've all learned something.
If you go just a little bit deeper with corn, then it won't tip over in the wind. Corn is one thing, though, that never try to plant it. If it's overgrown and root bound at all, it won't do diddly squat. It does horribly. You're going to want to plant perfect, the right size starts for corn. And we're never going to send you any overgrown stuff, so you don't worry about that from here. But it's always better to plant a little bit smaller corn start than a little bit too big. If it gets too big, tomatoes and stuff, a lot of them, peppers, tomatoes, things like that are pretty forgiving. If you rip the root ball apart a little bit, they do just fine. Not so much with corn. I don't know if there's any absolutely a way to come back from an overgrown corn. It's pretty much a throwaway.
Okay. Now sometimes, David, I know that when we've had a lot of plants go out the door and we've had to do a replant, there have been times so that we could meet the needs of the customers where we've had to send them a little younger than we like to out the door, and so they might be a little smaller than what we like to send a plant start to a customer. What does a customer do in that case when they get a little younger start because of us having to, in order to have plants to send, do that if there's been an additional planting?
Yeah, we do send them a little bit. We err on the side of young instead of old because they're going to be better. So there's two things. Most of anything we're going to send, if your garden is totally ready, the soil is right, everything's perfect, you can put them out. If it's not quite perfect, the weather is a little bad, it gives you some time. Just set them in a sunny window, water them, keep them watered a little bit, a sunny windowsill, anywhere where they can get a little sun, and they will continue to grow. There's plenty of nutrients in the pot to grow them on up. You don't need to worry about it. They're going to have nutrients to go for a while. Okay. Don't let them get root bound. But as far as, if you want to keep your plants for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and, the sunnier and warmer place that you are, the faster they're going to grow. If you need to slow it down, you get them a little too early, you get a cold snap, you need to keep them. Put them in some place where there's light, but somewhere it's cold. Someplace that it's cool. We've even kept plants in a cooler. Not talking, standard fridge might not be a good idea because the temperature's not regulated well enough. You might freeze them.
Right.
But you can slow them down a ton by just keeping them in a cool spot. Or if you need to grow them faster, put them in a nice warm spot. It's not really that difficult. They'll grow pretty fast in a warm spot. Every plant's a little different. Tomatoes grow pretty quickly. Some of the herbs grow quite slowly. You're talking about something like lavender or thyme or rosemary. Those things, and they will hold for a long time too. If you get rosemary or thyme or something like that, your garden's not ready, you can keep it on your windowsill for a month and not have to worry about it. It'll be just fine. You couldn't do that with a tomato. That would, they would be completely root bound if you tried to do that.
Well, we definitely appreciate that advice, especially for those of us, you say, oh, it's easy. Well, I have a brown thumb. Oh. I don't have the green thumb. I need all the advice I can get to make sure that I give these plants a chance when they come into my possession. Because they are so well taken care of and loved here with such tender care, and watching the kids help and be a part of that is just, and how much care that they put into helping plant the seeds and grow the plants. It's just exciting to see that.
Yeah, sometimes it's a family. For Sarah's for the starts here. Every once in a while, usually on a Sunday afternoon or something, we'll have work parties. So they bring hey, it's a little party, all the little kids, everybody comes over and everyone's doing a transplanting party or a seed planting, and when things get behind. We have a regular crew that works here every day, but when they're pulling a lot of orders, that doesn't give them a lot of time in the afternoon to get more stuff planted. So then we have these extra parties. They love work parties. So I mean, it is one of those things that still they're still very involved with, and even the little ones can't. 6 and 7 year olds love to transplant plants. Not that they get a lot done, but hey, it's a part of growing up, I think. To be able to do some productive work, and that's a good thing. When you do get your plants, though, two things, because they have been on the truck for a while, take them out of the box as soon as possible and check and see if they need water. Some of them will dry out, sometimes not so much, but you're going to get a certain amount of drying on the truck. And especially if they've been on the truck for a week on some of the longer routes, they may need water sooner rather than later. They can look pretty peaked when they come off. They can almost look wilted. Give them water and they'll come right back. I'm not saying there's not a point of no return if they get dry enough. There is. But, I've come in and seen things, when there's been errors. These things were all drooped like, looked absolutely like they're dead. Water them all. Hour later, they're all back up, happy as a lark. You couldn't even tell it ever really happened.
They said thank you.
So yeah, they're very happy to get the water. Now, like I say, there is a point of no return, but for the most part, they're very, very resilient on water as well.
What about when they get cold? Because I know that our trucks are refrigerated, and so they are traveling cold. And you talked about the ability for plants to be in the cold. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So there is always the possibility that they freeze. Now, some plants can handle a frost. For instance, brassicas, no problem. They're fine. Onions, no problem. They can freeze pretty hard. I mean, not super hard, but they can freeze pretty decent and not be damaged. Now, there's other plants that are very sensitive. Melons, for instance, basil, cucumbers. And then those things, they hit 32, they're done.
Right.
Or, 31.8. Once they get below freezing, they're probably not going to make it. Then there's some things like the tomatoes and squash and peppers. They really don't like freezing. They're frost-sensitive plants, but they're not so sensitive. It might nip a leaf off or two, but they'll still come back and do just wonderful. The trucks, for the most part, all of our trucks are refrigerated. We try to keep them at, around 40 degrees so that the food all is properly cared for. You get your produce in good shape and your yogurt and all those things. Plants at that temperature are just fine. Nothing is damaged at that temperature. There have been times when there's been a mistake made. Somebody set something a little too low, put them in the wrong spot on the truck. Something happened where they do freeze. And if a plant is ever going to arrive dead and not in good shape, there's only two things that could cause that, other than the box being absolutely turned upside down and all the dirt falling out. One is to get too dry, which very, very seldom happens, or the other is to freeze. And that happens more frequently than, it's rare, but it happens more frequently than them getting too dry. And if they do freeze, that's very spotty. You're going to lose your basil, you're going to lose your melons, maybe squash, tomatoes, and things. Most of your herbs are going to be fine. All your brassicas are going to be fine. Onions will be fine. Strawberries will be fine. All of those kinds of plants are very tolerant to a little frost. So, and that's one of the ways you can tell if your box freezes. Yeah, some things will be good and some won't. And of course, if that happens, give us a call and we'll absolutely replace them. It's a very rare occurrence, but I've never say never. It's happened before. So
yep. Occasionally I find that, I know we put a barrier between, when we are doing the plants, we'll put some cardboard barrier between the frozen part of the truck bulkhead and the chilled part. But every now and then, the plants that are closer to the frozen side, occasionally we see some that just got a little too cold and frosted, but yeah. We don't get too many calls on that. It's an occasional thing, like you said.
Yeah, it's a rare thing, but it can happen. We've had bulkheads fail a few times over the years. We've had drivers set dual temp trailers at the wrong temperature. Had all those things happen. So never say never, but for the most part, properly, when they go on a normal truck, they're in really good shape. The fun thing about most of these plants, most of these are heirloom or open pollinated plants. So if you do decide to save your own seed, you can totally do that from it. We have a few, and they're clearly noted on both the computer and in the catalog, depending on if you're ordering online or off of paper. But they're clearly noted as F1. So an F1 plant is a hybrid. Hybrid is basically a first generation cross between two varietals. The two varietals will be crossed in just the appropriate way to create an F1 hybrid. There are a few, for instance, sweet corn, we do an F1. The bicolor is an F1. The double standard is an open pollinated. The difference, they both taste good. The difference between the two, because we carry the hybrid, is for the reason of the hybrid will hold at optimum way longer on the corn stalk. Double standard, when it's just right, but you better pick it within 2 days, a 2 or 3 day window to get this picked. The bicolor with the hybrid, that'll hold at optimum sweet corn flavor for a week, maybe 10 days, depending on the temperatures. It lasts a lot better. So you can have sweet corn on the cob before it gets overgrown, starchy, and starts to get hard. So that's why we offer some of the hybrids and a few of the varietals, is because there's certain attributes that, as far as I know, are not easily found in an open pollinated variety. And hybrids are not that difficult to do. You can do them yourself, but you have to know the parental varieties and exactly how to do it. It's not something that we recommend people do in your garden and backyard.
Sure. So can you talk a little bit about that? I know that we get customer calls sometimes asking about, does hybrid mean that it's genetically modified? And we know that it's not, but could you share a little bit about the difference in that? Because I think there's some confusion. Hybrid gives an idea in some of our heads that there's something that's been done to change the plant.
Okay. Well, and in a way there is a little bit, but it's not something that does not occur in nature. So an open pollinated variety is something that has been the way it is for long enough that the genetics are uniform and it stays true to variety. So if you have an open pollinated tomato and it's pollinated with the same variety of open pollinated tomato, so in other words, you don't have other tomatoes too close, then you will get the same variety of tomato from seed, or corn, or fill in the blank, it's any of them. The seeds will be true to type. You will plant that variety, and you will get that variety. With a hybrid, what happens is you plant two different varieties of tomatoes close together. This is not exactly how you make a hybrid, but
Sure.
this is how nature would make a hybrid. In nature, if you plant two different varietals close together, the pollen gets from one variety to another. You get a cross between, say, just for instance, if we're talking about tomatoes, what if we get a cross between a cherry and a beefsteak tomato? So it's half cherry tomato, half beefsteak. What kind of a tomato are you going to end up getting? Now, the tomatoes themselves will be true to type because that is what's on the vine. So you can plant them side by side. There's no problem. They will stay true to type. But if you save the seeds from those cherry tomatoes that were right next to the beefsteak, when you plant those next time, they're going to be beefsteak genetics with the cherry tomato genetics. And if it's just nature, you don't know what you're going to get. You may get a great big tomato, you may get a medium-sized tomato, you might get a little tiny tomato, depending on how the genetics played out. Anytime genetics play out, there's dominant genetics and subdominant. And when you have unknown quantities, you don't really know what you're crossing. You don't really know what the result is.
So kind of like people?
Yeah, people. If dad has brown eyes and mom has blue eyes, chances are most of the kids are going to have brown eyes. Brown eyes are a little more dominant, but very easily, even if both parents have brown eyes and grandparents have blue eyes, you could get a blue-eyed. It's the same, it's the same with plants. It's just that the genetics are a lot different. The genetics, could be a big old beefsteak tomato that you get a whole one slice for a sandwich, or it can be a little cherry tomato that you pop in your mouth. And so folks they kind of like to know what you're getting.
Sure.
And, when you have children, you're okay with however they turn out. Right. Blue eyes or brown eyes, probably
Tall,
either
short.
one's fine. Yeah. Tall, short, the various pieces of genetics are very, but you might not want that with the tomato. Big, small, whatever. So if you're okay with it, sometimes, when I was a kid, I actually planted a cherry tree one time. Just let it, from seed. It was a hybrid cherry. And thought, I'm going to have this cherry tree. It was off of beautiful cherries. When the cherry tree actually got big enough, and that takes like 5 years. I'm tending this little tree out in the backyard for like 5 years. When I get it, the cherries were about that big. They were the tiniest cherries you ever seen in your life. It turns out, however the genetics played out, and I don't really know exactly because, the bees brought the pollen from, I have no idea where the pollen that pollinated that cherry came from. But it obviously was nothing like its mother cherry. Those cherries were tiny. They tasted really good, but they were the tiniest cherries you ever saw in your life. They were smaller than a pie cherry. So,
wow.
You just don't know. It could have been that you would get the best cherry ever, and some varieties are actually made that way. So you continue to plant back, or in a case of a cherry tree, graft over the same varietal, and you create a new plant. So basically, if you get a hybrid, so a hybrid is controlled. We'll go there first. It's the controlled crossing of two genetics. So we know that if you cross this exact variety of beefsteaks and this exact variety of cherry tomato, you're always going to get a very uniform salad tomato. And if that's the case, if that's the desired result, then you create that cross on purpose, but you make sure that the pollen is going from the cherry to the beefsteak or vice versa. It's not uniform both directions.
Sure.
So you only save the seed from the beefsteak if you want that, and you make sure it was pollinated by the cherry. So a lot of times in controlled environments, you actually even they'll hand pollinate. They'll take a Q-tip on the one and pollinate the beefsteak with that. Corn, they take and they'll plant every other row. one and one the other. And then one they want the female genetics from, they cut all the tassels off.
Okay.
And so all the tassels on the male, the ones they want the male genetics from, will be there. That is the only thing that can pollinate the female, the silks on corn. So that's a way you do it. I don't know, if you're in the corn country, you might have seen where they have every other row all the tassels chopped off, or sometimes they'll do 2 rows and 2 rows. So that's how hybrids are created. They're controlled crosses of varietals, but they happen in nature. Genetic modification does not happen in nature. It is taking something outside of the species that will, in fact, have genetic crossover. It may take something from the animal kingdom and put it in the plant kingdom. It may take something from a completely different varietal. In nature, a bean and a tomato will never cross. A bean and a tomato will never cross. That is impossible in nature. So in genetic modification, you can actually do that, but you introduce a virus into the plant that with the creating, so that it will not reject the DNA from the foreign materials. And it's laboratory work. It's something that can only be done in a lab. It can't be done in nature. And it's being done, really, I had somebody tell me the other day, we were talking about open pollinated and hybrids, and he was actually worked at a seed plant, place that sells seeds. And he said, well, hybrid is the most natural. And I think, well, in a way he's right, but controlled hybrids are not. But nature, bees plant from flower to flower to flower in nature, within the species, creating hybrids accidentally all the time, all day long. It's just that we never save seed from that. We make sure that the plants, we actually isolate the open pollinated plants and seeds that we want to save seed from on purpose to keep them from hybriding. So it's something that we have to do on purpose to not hybrid. The cool thing about open pollinated is, though, they are true to type. You can grow them from generation to generation to generation. You know what you have. They're completely naturally occurring seeds. You can plant the seeds 100 generations or 1,000 or whatever. It's all going to end up being the same thing. It's going to be very unique to that. And that's why we have heirloom seeds. They're all open pollinated. All heirloom seeds are open pollinated because they've been passed from generation to generation.
Okay. Can there be...
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Can there be open pollinated that are not heirloom?
Absolutely. Yeah, the definition of heirloom is a little bit ambiguous. Heirloom typically means that they have been true to type for a minimum of 40 years. That's what most people define as heirloom. Now, you can have an open pollinated plant that it may have been or it may not have been, but we can't trace it back for 40 years. It can't technically be called heirloom. But it's still perfectly fine from an open pollinated position. If you found it in the wild and it was just growing out there and you replanted it and it was true to type, a wild plant, it couldn't be called heirloom until we had 40 generations or 40 years. But it's still totally open pollinated.
Sure.
Anything that's open pollinated is true to type. You can save the seed, you'll get the same thing. Hybrid, you will not. It's a cross. Genetically modified is lab work in a science. Inserted viruses.
But you won't find here?
You won't find that here. No, we do not think nature, we believe in the way nature does things. And then, of course, heirloom has just been around a lot longer. So that's really the only difference between an open pollinated and heirloom.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. I know that there's sometimes confusion in understanding the terms if you're not familiar with them. So.
Okay, so we're now in production line where things actually get shipped here at Azure. So as you can see, they actually have 2 lines going today. It's a relatively big day. So we start out over here. As you see, they have a pick ticket, piece of paper. I don't know if she's running away from us here. And it shows, it tells what plants that customer wanted. And so then we pull them into these trays. So we move things from all the 12 greenhouses into these racks, so it's fairly close together. It's not real far apart from place to place. And then they get going here and they'll pull a little of this and a little of that, depending on what the customer wants. They're in order to the way that they go. And so here we're at, and as I showed, they're pretty resilient. She just threw a marigold down the pike. It'll be fine. They'll put a little water on it and it'll be beautiful. Those then, once they're pulled, they go over here and they're being scanned. So we scan them to make sure that we pick the right thing. And once we know we picked the right thing, it prints a label that looks just like the labels that are on the boxes. It goes there. So they're putting them in a box, putting the labels on the box, and then the next place is they get we cut little holes in them to make sure that they have air, and at the same time we put these live plant stickers on with arrows so they go the right direction. We have Ellie over here doing that today, right now, putting the stickers on at least. And then once the plants are boxed up, poles are cut in the boxes, then we palletize them. And so there's a different pallet for each truck that goes out. So that's pretty much it's pretty simple. But there's a lot of plants. So as you can see, they run pretty quick in here. We have to. There's a lot of plants to get out every day, and this is they're ready to get on the truck, and good to go.
Now,
So
David, sometimes in the plants, we hear customers say there's a plant missing. So from one of the little spots in the plant.
Yeah, so sometimes there'll be a plant missing like this one. We used to, back in the day, we used to dump this out, try to put a new one in, and it just became so unbearably time consuming to do that. Chances are you're going to get a full deck of all 6, like this one. But if for some reason you get 5, that's why we have 5 in the sale flyers and on the website. We say 5-pack instead of 6-pack because we just don't have time to take the time to dump this little square out and put another one in if we don't have 100% perfect germination.
So we sell them as a 5-pack, even though it has 6 slots. And if you get a 6th one, that's
and you will most of the
time. Yeah.
But we don't want to say that we have 6 when we may not.
Right.
And we just don't want to take the time to make sure that every single one has 6 in it. So you're going to get a minimum of 5. You know, if it has less than that, which occasionally happens, not often, but occasionally, we will fix them still.
Sure.
But or not use, not send them out.
But you'll at least get 5.
Well, at least a 5 if it says 5-pack.
Yes.
We have some things that say 3-pack, and most of those are like 4-packs. Here's a good example of that. This is a calendula. It's the way those look when they go out. So we call this a 3-pack. Obviously, you're getting 4, but if there's one missing, there'll be one missing.
And so we've only charged for 3.
Yeah,
even though.
Well, here's one calendula here that only has 3. There's one missing. But instead of taking the time to make sure, but the vast majority of them have 4. So anyway, that's basically how the process is here. We would love for you to try the Ellie's Eden Azure Starts. I believe they're the best that there is for your garden anywhere. And here's pallets ready to go. Maybe your plants can be on here next time. So thank you, and those of you who buy plants, thank you. It's really fun to do this process. We appreciate it, and hey, thanks for being an Azure fan. We love you guys, and have a wonderful